is Gary. I'm privileged to be speaking at the Polyglot Conference, and I thank all the organizers and everyone that's putting their effort in order to carry out this event online. And today I'm going to talk about the Nahuatl of El Salvador and the interesting Central American language called Lenca. I want to dedicate this presentation to all the Nahuatl speakers in Santo Domingo de Guzman in El Salvador, and also the linguist Alan King, who worked so much for the revitalization of this language, and many other people that in El Salvador that I have worked alongside with in order to revitalize this language. And so I thank everyone, and I dedicate this presentation to all of them. I'm going to start by introducing myself. My name is Gary Ordóñez. I was born in El Salvador in a monolingual family. I learned English when I was 11 years old. My mom put me into this institute where I could learn English every Saturday, and I would go there. I graduated from there, and then I started my studies in college, and I studied English and French. During those years, I found out that I was good at languages, I was good at sounds, and I was really passionate about phonetics, linguistics. And so I started to teach myself Russian and later on German. I stopped learning them a while ago because I needed to concentrate on other things, but I found out that I was really good at languages, and I took advantage of that when I got my college degree. I focused on French, I focused more on English, and then this interest on indigenous languages came, and I was always curious about the culture of my country, and I thought that we didn't have any indigenous language anymore. And for example, Guatemala and Honduras, all of the countries in Central America, they have these minority languages, and they're very alive. And I thought, why don't we have an indigenous language? And so a friend of mine one day came, and he told me, "Hey, I know you like languages. I know you're interested in linguistics and phonetics, and you need to talk to my friend." And he's a doctor, but he also knows a lot of languages, and he knows Nahuatl. And I'm like, "Oh, that's interesting. Probably he learned it from some ancient books or something." And so I started talking to this person on Facebook, and he told me, yes, there are resources. There are many things that you can find about Salvadoran Nahuat, and not Mexican Nahuatl with the TL sound, because mostly in general culture, we only know about the Nahuatl with the TL sound. But he told me we still have speakers in our country. I can take you there one time, someday, and then you can learn the language. And I said, yes, let's do it. So I first downloaded the PDF that in fact was created by Alan King, who helped a lot in the revitalization and in the systematization of resources in Nahuatl. So I started learning lesson 1, 2, 3, and I was really confident. I was feeling confident, and I found out about many different and new things about this indigenous language that I had never run into when I was learning European languages. So I got passionate about it. I started going to the community. I started talking to the people that spoke the language, and I learned Nahuatl. I can say I learned Nahuatl very well. I understand more than I can speak it, but still, it has been such a great journey. I met amazing people. I've made friends with Nahuatl speakers who are mostly elderly people, and I consider them my grandparents, my family. And alongside, I've made friendships with other people around me, linguists, anthropologists and friends that have the same sense of revitalizing the language. So it's been such a great journey, and that's why I wanted to talk about the Salvadoran Nahuat, because it's not known in the general culture, and so I want to talk about it. It's very bad. So I'm going to talk about the Nahuatl of today. I'm just going to dip into some history of the origin of Nahuatl, and then I'm going to talk about the characteristics of our variety of Nahuatl, or the Nahuatl language of El Salvador. And then at the end, I'm going to talk about just a little bit of the Lenca language, which is an extinct language of the country, but it has some amazing things that are worthy mentioning. And also, there's this project of revitalizing the language too, also led by Alan King. So let's start. I need to talk about Mesoamerica. Mesoamerica is just, it's a historical region and a cultural area of North America and part of Central America. It's a mosaic of cultures, and I represented Mesoamerica with a volcano, because there are a lot of volcanoes and mountains in Mesoamerica, and they have a lot to do with the mythical stories of Mesoamerican languages. You can access the underworld, which is represented here in this painting, in this canvas, and so Mesoamerica is a mosaic of different cultures and different languages, but even though they're very different, they share many things. And for example, in this area, the ancient people domesticated cacao, maize, beans, tomato, avocado, vanilla, squash, and many other foods. And also they domesticated the turkey and a breed of dog. So the dog is Cholos Quintle, which is found in Mexico. You find hundreds of varieties of maize. And here is an example of the dressing of the Cachical women in Guatemala. So even though we share many things, we're distinct in many ways. One of the traits that we share are the mythological stories, or the complex mythological tradition, also the religion, the vigesimal numeric system are now the languages they use the counting based on 20 instead of 10. The complex calendric system, like that of the Mayas, and the traditional ball playing. At some point, it was called Mayan football, but now it's called Mesoamerican ball play or game. And also, the ancient cultures, they shared a lot of the architectural styles, so you can see a lot of influence among each other, influence in the art, influence in the dressing too. So there was a lot of communication and mixing of different traits. Sorry. So I just want to show you the variety of languages that you can find in Mesoamerica. There are around 5 major family groups. You can see Mayan, Otomangue, Mijesoque, Totonacan, Utoazteca, and Chibchan languages. I'm going to focus on the Utoaztecan language family, because that's where the Nahuan come from. We also have isolate languages like Purepecha, Huave, Tequistlateco, the Mesoamerican family, and Lenca. These last 2 are found at the edge of the Mesoamerican region. So the Nahuan, the Utoaztecan, they came from the northern part of Mexico, and they started to make their way into Mesoamerica, that's where the Nahuan people also started to migrate into the Mesoamerica area. And so out of this migrations, we will find different that's the origin of the different Nahuatl and Nahuatl or Nahual varieties. So I'm going to explain how these varieties came to exist, and how our variety came to exist too. So we are going to talk about the migrations. Um, the migrations happened in a span of hundreds of years, and it's I'm going to cite Hansen. He's a linguist who's made some research on the varieties of Nahuas. Okay, the Nahuas languages. So you can check out his blog here. I put the website where you can check out the whole article on that. And this map was made by him too. So I'm going to cite him. Um, so the purple area is where the Nahuan family was found before going into different migrations. So there are two main varieties, Eastern and Western varieties. I'm going to explain why they're called like that. So the first migration came from this area and started to make their way into central Mexico, and they settled there and they mingled with the other cultures that had already settled down there, like Mayans, like the Otomangue family, the Mijisoque family, and probably other language families that existed there before the Nahuas. So they settled in Cholula, and they started their own culture and everything. They probably subdued other cultures, and they imposed their own language, and they were influenced at the same time by the surrounding languages. So their Nahuatl started to change. So it is hypothesized that the original phoneme for the Nahuas was the TL sound, like tl. So probably they spoke with a tl sound, but they lost it to the influence of other, for example, Mayan languages. They didn't have this sound, so the newer generation started to abandon the sound in favor of a easier sound like the T sound. So this first migration was called Eastern because they started to migrate into the east of Mexico, and they started to obtain different, develop or evolve different features. Um, and so then you have some Nahuas that stay behind at the border of the northern Mesoamerican border, and they started to migrate hundreds of years later into central Mexico, where the Eastern Nahuas had already settled for hundreds of years before or earlier. Um, and so these new Nahuans that came into Central America, they started to settle uh, uh, like near their cousins, their eastern cousins, and so they started to migrate more and more, and they started to chase off their eastern cousins, and so this is the beginning of a new empire, and this is where the Aztec Empire came to be. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this because I'm not an expert on how all the history developed, but in a linguistic point of view, the Western variety came and they settled and they started to influence the Eastern varieties, especially with the rise of the Aztec Empire. The Western features or vocabulary or whatever you want to call it, morphological, lexical features started to influence the Eastern varieties that were at the surroundings. And so the other Eastern varieties have started to migrate south and more to the south, and they reached Central America, and they left a trace all the way to Costa Rica. Not all the varieties survived after the colony. Probably they died out because they were few in number. compared to the other cultures that were in Central America. But you can see here the trace, and actually you can find the eastern varieties in this area that is marked here. So our country is found here, and so an eastern variety came at that time, and it settled, and 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 that's how our Nahuatl came to exist, and evolved with its own features, sharing some features with his brothers left behind, but or his sister languages, whatever you want to call it, and but they also started to develop different things because they were influenced by the neighboring cultures like Mayan culture, like a Lencan culture, Xincan, and other cultures that probably we're not aware of. So these are the present varieties. The red ones are the eastern varieties, or the ones that have the most eastern features, and then the blue ones are the western varieties. As you can see, they're at the west part of Mexico, and here you have the east part of Mexico, or the east part of the map. And then you have other varieties that probably developed before the split of the western and eastern varieties. So so our Nahuatl is here. Our Nahuatl is called also Pipil, but I don't wanna. I don't like calling it like that because the Nahuatl speakers, they don't identify themselves with Pipil. They Pipil in our Nahuatl is kid or child. So probably the etymology is not referred to a child. Probably it's referred to nobleness or a prince or something like that. But the speakers of Salvador Nahuat, they identify themselves as Nahuas or Nahuat. They speak Nahuat. So um, that's how I'm going to refer to them from now on, because there are other Pipil varieties that call themselves Pipil also, and they are found in the Isthmus of Mexico. So this is the historical region before the colony, and there was a like around there was about three seniorities or dominions that the Nahuans had. The Salvadoran Nahuans had. I can mention the Zalco, Nonualco, and Cuscatan, which is where the actual capital is now. And to date, Nahuatl speakers refer to the capital as Guscatan or Gushkatan because it comes from the ancient seniority that was settled there. And so now, because of different historical factors, the population has dwindled, and now we can only find Nahuatl speakers in 4 or 5 municipalities. The biggest one, the biggest community is in Santo Domingo de Guzman. It's the variety that I learned. Cuiznahuat, Tacuba, Nahuizaco, and Izaco. These last two have the least number of speakers because of the genocide that took place in 1932, carried out by the military president Martinez. So because of political and economic reasons, he he initiated this genocide against the Nahuatl speakers. So this is when our speakers stopped passing on the language, or they concealed themselves, and they hid away. They escaped to Guatemala, and so from this time on, their culture was taken away. They stopped wearing their clothes, their typical clothes, and practically they stopped. They wanted to mingle with the mestizo culture because they didn't want to be recognized as indigenous people. So that is why we have so few Nahuatl speakers to date. But despite all these difficulties that the Nahuatl speakers had, they managed to pass on the language within their own households, and now in Santo Domingo de Guzman, we can find many families that have passed on the language effectively throughout generations since 1932. And you can find Nahuatl speakers like them. They don't wear loincloths or feathers on their heads, as you can see. They look like people that work in the countryside of the country. And some of the women, they still wear their own skirts, typical skirts that similar to those of Guatemala. But unfortunately, they've been living in poverty conditions for years and years due to political reasons and social reasons. And now the language is found in the 8A level of EGIDS on the EGIDS scale because the language has not been passed on for the last years, for the last generation. And the speakers, the native speakers, are above 50 years old. So in one generation, there won't be any more native speakers if the language is not passed on to newer generations. But there have been some language revitalization programs and projects, initiatives by the community, by the Salvadoran community, and I'm including in that. We have now a university that supports the Nahuatl classes that some of my friends, they impart these classes. They learn the language with the people in Santo Domingo de Guzman, and we've done many other projects. So I'm very happy that the revitalization process has begun and it keeps going to date. I'm going to talk about the language itself right now. First of all, there has been many proposals for the alphabet, and now we do have a let's say like an official language that was proposed by Irin, which was an it's a group of indigenous people that was formed years ago, and linguists too, and other people, stakeholders that wanted to revitalize the language. So they proposed this this alphabet that has been used in the methods that Alan King created, and also that the new generation of new speakers are learning with. So we use this language, and it's called the Eating alphabet because it was proposed years ago by indigenous people and other people that were focused on the language. The Ministry of Education recently created some methods to learn language that were addressed to kids in basic education. So they took the base of their alphabet was the Eating alphabet, as you can see here. And they're very similar. They're just different and certain phonemes. And we also find native speakers writing their own notes, and this is very motivating because you have native speakers who learned how to write in Spanish, but they transferred the alphabet into their own into their native language, and you can see there is a correspondence to the other proposals. So there's a hope that the Nahuatl keeps on being written in social media, on the internet, and also, of course, in normal life. So I'm going to talk about the language itself. Now, the Nahuatl language. It's a polysynthetic language, which means that you can have a root, a radical of a word, and you can add a lot of suffixes and prefixes. And so this is a verb. The verb is a very important part of the language. And it's this verb. Is pronounced timoyohulishkweptiwita, which means which we have been doing front flips already. And I'm going to explain the different some features that the Nahuatl language has. uh, from this verb. So you can see that. Sorry, you can see that this is a verb that you see some reduplication here, and you can't really tell where it starts and begins. But here I've parsed out the verb, and you can see that there are around 8 morphemes that you can break it down into. So I'm going to explain a little bit of that, how it works, and probably you can relate it to the languages that you know. If you want more information on the Nahuatl language, the Salvadoran language Nahuatl, you can go to tushik.org. You can find all of the resources. You can find the information that I'm giving right now, and so what I'm going to talk about is the information that I took from this website and also from personal research, because I also research the Nahuatl language, and presently I've been doing new researches, and it's been really amazing, the findings. So first of all, I'm going to show to you how the Nahuatl sounds like. So I'm going to play a little clip, and you will be hearing two native speakers talking to each other. So let me play it.
Contame. Yahkit ganepa. Tu te idat que nepa más para.
Tahatina gagichiwit. Gahastu. San Cristóbal o San Lucas. Gahastu.
San Lucas. San Lucas hasto.
Gahastu.
Porque gikman gichestivit ne tepet nesi nepa. Haya hasto ni tupan.
Ah, negat
pero como kichisket se apuesta.
So as you could hear, well, probably the phonology is not very hard, and actually it is not. It has basic consonants, and you could hear probably some Spanish in it. I took all this information from the Wikipedia, which I found very accurate, and I can vouch for it because of the linguistic knowledge that I have too about on the Nahuatl. So you can see here that we have you know stops, voiceless stops, notably. We have affricates, we have fricatives, we have nasals and semivowels. We have 4 basic vowels, but the U sound has its allophone, the O sound. But for example, most of the varieties that exist in El Salvador, they have the U phoneme, whereas it's the predominant sound. But there's one dialect in Nahuatl that has the O sound only. So they all the words are in O instead of U. So it's really interesting how dialects can vary on one vowel. I'm sure that it happens in other languages. You can see here Tahtzing Marcelina and Nancing Paula. I met her. She was one of my teachers at the time when I started learning Nahuatl. And this is an interview done by Irene, the same ones who proposed the alphabet. And here you can find it on YouTube as I don't remember the name right now, but I can refer it to you, or I can later give you the link to this channel on YouTube. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm gonna talk about the features that the now it has is as I said before, it's polysynthetic. You could see the word that I showed before. It's got reduplication and a bunch of things. I'm not gonna talk about all of them, but I'll show you some examples. And morphosyntactic phenomena like transitivity, which is very important in the Nahuatl verbs. some lexicon curiosities like the colors, etymology of animals, and the dialects, okay, that there are in El Salvador. So I'm going to talk about reduplication. Reduplication is where when you repeat a morpheme or a part of the word in order to, in this case in Nahuatl, to make it plural, or in verbs to make it iterative. So it's a very common phenomenon in Nahuatl. And this, for example, we have the fruit avocado, and in our Nahuatl is said awagat. So that's one. And then if you want to say it in plural, you will say ahawagat, ahawagat. So the accent doesn't change. It's still the second last syllable, which has the accent, and then you just add this reduplication at the beginning. In this case, the a syllable is the one who's going to reduplicate, and then you add a ha sound to the syllable, and so you get ahawagat. Okay, so there's always this ha sound after the reduplication. Something interesting about the nouns in Nahuatl is that we have this, when the noun stands alone, usually all the nouns end on a specific morpheme. The native nouns, they have this absolutive suffix, which is t, or it could be just a t, like amat, or it could be ti, or t, or like in quachti, as you can see here. It could be et, like in guyamet, or it could be it, like in gumit. And so this absolutive suffix. It drops when the noun is combined with other morphemes, especially the possessive morphemes that go at the beginning of the noun. So in possession, the nouns will be changing, and they will turn into a shorter form. For example, amat, the T drops, and then you add this double W, amau. So if you want to say book, you will say amat. But if you want to say my book, you will say nuamau. This feature does happen, but I think because of the deterioration of the language, some speakers do not do it anymore. Then we have quachti. So my clothes would be nuquach, or my cloth, nuquach. Pig is guyamet, but my pig would be nuguyan, like in this. And then you can see here some pots. They're called in Nahuatl gumit. So if you want to say my pot, you would say nugung. There's a mutation of the nasal sound, but that is it has a rule, okay? But it's really interesting how the nouns change when you possess them. Of course, we have pronouns. You can see them here. You have subject prefixes, and you have object prefixes also, and we have possessive prefixes. And so when you, for example, when you combine the subject prefix and the object prefix, they're in this order. So the subject goes first, and then the object, and then you have the verb, and then you have other things attached or dropping from the verb to indicate the tense, to indicate the number, to indicate if it's applicative, causative, etc. And the pronouns are optional. So it's a pro-drop language, and they're optional, and they also help to reinforce the reference. I'm not going to talk about all the tenses that there are in Nahuatl, but as you can see, it has present, predicated, perfect, subjunctive, future conditional. It has when you conjugate all the verbs into the past tense, they fall into four categories. So the suffix, the predicated suffix is different, or there's absence of any suffix depending on the class of the verb. So you can see here the suffix is ki. Here it's only k, or the k sound. Here the verb drops the vowel, and here you drop the vowel and then you add the h sound. So it's there's a pattern to each class of verbs. So it's really interesting. This is, I think, the hardest part of the Nahuatl language, is to tame the tenses and to tame the four classes in the predicate, because they're a little bit hard to deal with when you're trying to communicate. The transitivity in Nahuatl is very important because the verb, as I said, the verb is very important in Nahuatl. So the verb has to show if there is an object, so you mark it in the verb. If it does not have an object but is a transitive verb, still, like for example, here it says the woman sells. Okay, so to sell is a transitive verb. It needs an object. But if you don't want to specify it, you put this suffix called in accusative, and it's ta. So tamaga means to be selling things, but you don't specify what things. You just sell things, right? You have intransitive verbs like to cry. So it says here, the child cries. So you don't need any marking here at all. And then you have verbs that take two objects. Usually in now what you would say the object, the direct object, and then you have the oblique object. It's called oblique because it's not marked in the verb. It's only put after the verbs, but it's still part of the syntactic relationship. So here you have nesiwat gimarak negunet netuming. The woman gave the child some money, or the money. So in this case, the direct object of the verb is the person whom you give to the money. So it's the direct object, and it's marked in the verb as gi, the third person, and netumin is not marked in the verb, so it's the oblique object. So it's a very complex syntactic relationship, and some verbs take objects. Their objects are only human, and whereas the other verbs only take things as direct objects. You have incorporation. You have incorporation here. It's really interesting how Nahuatl creates new words. So you have, I put as a main example, the guyanguat, which is a mythical animal, and it's formed by two radicals. Guat is serpent and guyang is pig. So when you put them together, it turns out into the pig snake. And actually, that's the main characteristic of this big snake. It's that its face is of that of a pig, but its whole body is a serpent. So you can find many other examples. You have the first element, the first noun radical, and you attach it to another noun radical, and you have a new element, a new word. And this is why Nahuatl is very productive. Although there are rules that you have to follow, intrinsic rules that you don't have to break in order to make the right word. It's not just putting things together. Etymology of animal names. So you probably know the opossum, and now it is called taquatzing. It comes from the root qua, and then ting is the little thing, and then ta is the accusative. So the thing that eats other things, or the animal that eats things. So of course, this animal, it eats whatever it finds in your house or in the wild. You have the chiltota. It's called, that's how it's called in Salvadoran Spanish, chiltota, but it comes from the Nahuatl chil, which is reddish or red, and tutut, which is bird. So in Nahuatl they call it the reddish bird because of its main characteristic. And here we have the sensontle. In Mexico they call it sensontle. Here we call it sensonte or chonta, but in Nahuatl is called apawiani, which is pawia is to watch, and a is the root of water, and ni is the author, so the water watcher. So, and actually in the cosmovision of Nahuatl speakers, the chonta or the sensontle, it tells when it's going to rain. So the name in Nahuatl makes perfect sense. Okay, and I'm going to talk about the varieties that there are. I can show you here the proposal of the varieties that there are and there were in our region. So the blue one is called, we proposed, it's called the Cordillera de Apaneca, which is the mountain range of Apaneca that is here, and they share a common pronunciation, mainly on pronunciation. Izalco's is this part here, and they share a lot of phonological features. And then we have the Cordillera del Bálsamo. It's called like that because it's a mountain range where the balm trees planted. So these dialects here are very, let's say, very wild in their phonology. They differ from each other a lot, and so they're put together into one group because they still share some features, and I'm not going to go into detail. I just want to show you how diverse the Nahuatl is and has been for many years in our country, even though we're in a very small country. So that's everything I have for the Nahuatl. I recently, this Nahuatl speaker passed away, and I wrote something on Facebook in her honor because she was she was a native speaker. She learned Spanish when she was 12 years old. Her name is Visitacion, and so I learned a lot from her, and also from, as I said at the beginning, from all the speakers in Santo Domingo Guzman. So I wrote this something for her in Nahuatl, but I just wanted to show to you that how Nahuatl looks like written. And I'm just going to read something just so you can, and I can translate for you. So let's say here, so ang mig sa way nansing ito ay visitasyon unansing chong. Nimo machite Jesus uliwang yaha nimo tsumpulua ka achtu kwan nachnut sa kyuni tignawat wang gatipang niwalig nigmati mo chitay ina. So I said that I learned a lot from her, that her name was Visitacion, that I learned a lot from her, and that I was very confused at first when she spoke to me in Nahuatl, because she spoke very fast, and I really liked that because that challenged me to learn more the language. And I can say that at the end I could almost understand everything that she said. And well, I just thank her, and I really appreciate all the culture that she passed on to me and to other people. Finally, I'm just gonna mention the project on the Salvadoran Lenca revitalization. I think there's another presentation on the Lenca language, and I just want to mention that it's called Sembramos Maíz Nuevo en Nuestra Milpa Vieja. That's like the motto of the project. And in Lenca, it said Pidagogo Kadi Imaduya Isakambi. I like this language because it has many phonological features that that impressed me, and also because of the grammar that is very different from that of Nahuatl. So the Lenca languages are extinct. They're considered to be a family group, and there is the variety that exists. Probably there were many varieties in El Salvador, but the one that was documented is represented by Chilanga, which is in the eastern part of the country here, but there were many other Lencan languages in Honduras. In the project of the revitalization that was led by Alan King at that time, he proposed a name for the Lenca, and it was called Sai Ipudu, which meant the language of the sea or of the coast, because we're close to the coast, and the Sorori Pudum are the other varieties in Honduras. I'm just going to talk about the Salvadoran variety very shortly because I'm out of time now. So very interesting things about the Lencan language is that it has been influenced, or it was influenced by the Central American languages and Caribbean languages, especially the Mesoamerican family, which are mostly in Nicaragua and ancient and extinct language called Cacaopera, also in El Salvador. Their phonology is very interesting because it's got voiceless stops, but it sonorizes these stops in voiced contexts. It has ejective sounds like those of Mayan languages, and also if you're familiar with Georgian, they have ejective sounds or glottal consonants too. The typology of the language is OV, so the object goes first and the verb goes at the end, and it's like Japanese, Turkish, Quechua, and Basque. And so this puts the language apart from the Mesoamerican languages because, for example, the Mayan and the Nahuatl languages are not OV, whereas the Cacaopera and Miskito, which are Mesoamerican languages that are at the border of the Mesoamerica region, they do have this typology. So probably they influenced each other long time before the Mesoamerican languages came into this area. So you can see the consonants here. You have interesting ejective sounds, and we have 5 vowels. We have pronouns. It's very interesting that they have independent pronouns. They have intensive independent pronouns, and we have cladics. And these cladics are used for the possessor marking, for the object marking, and for the complement of postpositions. You have some genitive constructions with the E. You have the article that goes at the end because it's an OV language. So usually you have postpositions and many things going on the other side of what we are used to. We have many word categories, and I have to mention that all of this work is found in tushik.org. So if you want to look into it, if you want to participate in the revitalization program, you can start by learning this language. You have verb tenses and conjugations. You have 3 classes of verbs depending on their conjugation, and these are the verbs that have been documented. And something interesting too is that there is a negative present and negative past too. So you have, for example, aptakon, which is I enter, and if you want to say I do not enter, you would say aptangeu, which is something very strange for me because I had never run into this change of morphemes before. And of course, you have other tenses, present, past. As I said, the negative present, the negative past. You have the future, you have the imperative, etc. And you have compound verbs like with the verb she, to make or to do. So basic verbs are actually as a periphrastic verb, like for example, to finish is inar shi, estornudar, or to sneeze koju shi, to burn obor shi. So you have these periphrastic verbs that are usually just one radical in other languages. And you can tell from the documentation that there are very basic radicals, like, for example, the ging suffix that turns verbs into nouns. You have the ing, which is the root for mouth, and so on. So you can make new words from these word roots. And something interesting that I want to finish with are the loan words. And you can see how the influence among the languages. Of course, you will have a Spanish influence like cayu, masti, mozo, ora, y montagua, which is an interesting verb that comes from the verb, from the noun monte in Spanish. And then agua is the verbalizer. And then you have Nahuatl loan words like koda, mistu, shigal, shigit, and wat, that come from kohtan, mistung, shigal, chigiwit, and uwat in Nahuatl. And you can see here the meaning. And probably you have other that are not very clear. Loan words, nebal, which would come from nenepil, sorry, tongue in Nahuatl. Suwat from shumpe, sombrero. Silla, which is interesting, which means woman in Lenca, and siwat is in Nahuatl, and it's a loan word because they're very similar, and because in other Lencan varieties, in Honduran Lenca, the word for woman is mop and not silla. So the cognates are different. And then you have other nouns that we don't know if they came directly from Nahuatl or directly from or Nahuatl through Spanish into Lenca, like patush, wagash, tomadi, tumi, kashlang, which mean duck, cow, tomato, money, and chicken, which are things that, for at least duck, cow, money, and chicken do not come from the Lencan culture. But tomato probably was introduced by the Nahuatl speakers, and it did not exist before in the Lencan culture. So this is all for my presentation. I'm sorry I took a little bit longer. If you want to look more into this project of revitalizing the Lenca language, you can go into tushik.org, or you can go into these websites, or look on Google Salvadoran Lenca tushik.org, and you will find the website. And I thank everyone for your attention. I hope you've learned a little bit of the Nahuatl language and just a little bit of the Lenca language, which is a very interesting language that is worth to talk about, and that the world knows that these languages are very rich and very eccentric for me. So I thank you very much, and I hope I can get some questions and I can respond them as soon as possible. Thank you, and bye-bye.